everyone. This is the Crime Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbi Mack. Before I bring on my guest, I'll just remind you that the Crime Cafe has 2 ebooks for sale, the 9-book box set and the short story anthology. You can find the buy links for both on my website, debbimack.com, under the Crime Cafe link. You can also get a free copy of either book if you become a Patreon supporter. You'll get that and much more if you support the podcast on Patreon, along with our eternal gratitude for doing so. But first, let me put in a good word for Blueberry Podcasting. I'm a Blueberry affiliate, but that's not the only reason I'm telling you this. I've been using Blueberry Podcasting as my hosting service for my podcast for years, and it's one of the best decisions I ever made. They give great customer service. You're in complete control of your own podcast. You can run it from your own website, and it just takes a lot of the work out of podcasting for me. I find for that reason that it's a company that I can get behind 100% and say, you should try this. Try Blueberry. It doesn't require a long-term contract, and it's just a great company, period. And it also has free technical support by email, video, and phone. So you can get a human being there. Isn't that nice? Hi again, everyone. Today I have as my guest the author of a series of thrillers featuring a New York City detective, Lieutenant John Driscoll. His work has been translated for publication in at least six countries outside the U.S. He's also a native New Yorker, so that's a plus because so am I. I'm pleased to have with me today Thomas O'Callaghan. Hi, Thomas.
Hello,
I'm so glad
Debbie.
you're here today.
Yeah, nice to be here. Very nice to be here.
Awesome. I love your bookshelf there in the background. That's
Thank you
so
very
neat
much.
and beautiful. I wish my shelves were so beautiful.
Thank you.
What prompted you to write this series?
Interesting question. I never thought of writing. In college, I studied history and planned on perhaps going to law school. And after that, I began working for an insurance company, Allstate Insurance Company. And I had a pretty good career with them, sales agent, and everything was going well. And I figured I'd retire as a sales agent, only I didn't think I'd retire at the age of 49. They changed their the way they paid us. And if I wanted to stay on, it meant I was no longer an employee, but I was a franchise agent, and I had to pay for secretarial help and other support staff and whatnot. So the option was to sell my book of business and leave, or retire, or stay on as a franchise. So I sold my book of business, and that carried me for about 3 years. But at age 49, I needed something to do. And I spoke to a friend of mine who had a similar circumstance. And she asked me, what did I like to do? You know, if you're going to have a second career, it might be something you might like doing. And I said, well, I like to take photographs. And this was before the advent of the old iPhone. I had an old 35 millimeter camera. And I went out and I snapped some pictures. I lived near the park, Prospect Park in Brooklyn at the time. And I snapped some pictures and I enjoyed it. And the enthusiasm waned after about a month. And I said to her, I said, well, it's not a career choice. And she said, well, what else do you like to do? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I always thought I'd be an actor. I wanted to be a thespian when I was in high school and in college. I performed in theater groups, and I did some off-Broadway shows. And I said, that's what I'd like to do. So she recommended I go down and have some training because it'd been a while. And I went to HB Studios down in Manhattan, and that was fun. 2 months working with a group of other actors and some professional trainers, and I enjoyed it very much. But again, it waned. And I then went back to my faithful friend and said, well, where to now? And she said, well, what else do you like to do in your spare time? I said, well, I like to read. And she said, well, what do you read? And I said, well, I like to read murder mysteries, police procedurals, thrillers. And she said, well, why don't you write one? And I said, write one? I wouldn't know how to write one. And she said, well, you've done a lot of reading. You probably picked up the knack somewhere. You maybe developed a voice. Why don't you try to write? And I'll tell you what, I'll take a look at it. And the last thing you want to hear when you're a new writer is that someone's going to actually see it, you know? And I learned something along the way, that it's important to write like no one's ever going to read it, because you don't need that critic that's inside your head as you type that says, you know, this isn't good, someone's going to take issue with it, or wow, what would my mom say, you know, that kind of stuff. So I just threw caution to the wind, and I began to write like no one was ever going to read it, only this close friend. And I wrote an opening chapter of a book involving a crazed serial killer, and the introduction of a police team that would be called in to capture this individual. And she read it and she said, you know, I liked it. What's your next chapter about? And I said, well, I hadn't planned on that. And she said, well, you write another chapter. And after writing about 8 chapters, all typed out, and after her reviewing, she said, you know, I think you've got something here. And I suggest you see a friend of mine who is a psychotherapist, but he also teaches the art of writing, or he taught the art of writing years ago in Paris. And I said, okay. And I set up appointments with this individual, a fellow by the name of Stephen O'Hayan, who still is a psychotherapist in Manhattan. And between his patients, he would see me as a budding novelist, and I would bring him a chapter, and we would edit it. He would help me as a writing coach push it and get it better and better and better. And that continued for an appreciable amount of time till I finished what would be eventually book 1 in this trilogy. And then we went on to book 2. So that was it. It was an introduction to get into something I enjoyed doing. And I was hooked once I started writing. And that's where I went after 20 years of sales.
Wow. You were very fortunate to have a personal mentor sort of helping you through
Absolutely.
the process of that first book.
Yeah. She pushed me, and you know, she's been a friend for years, and she did some writing on her own, and I felt comfortable. And then when I was introduced to Stefan, who, as a psychotherapist, understands the mindset of crazy people, it was kind of perfect, because I was writing about serial killers, and I was getting into their heads and whatnot. So it really was a wise decision for a second career. Yeah.
That's a fantastic source of information. A psychotherapist who knows about writing
Yes.
can give you that insight. That's fantastic.
What are the
I was going to ask you about the research that you do, but it sounds as if some of your research was connected with your writing coaching in a sense.
Yes, and that end of it, yes, the writing coach would help me with the mindset of what a crazed killer was thinking and what a crazed killer would be doing. And in terms of police procedural, I read all of Ed McBain's 56, 87th Precinct novels, and I thought Steve Carella was going to stop by for dinner. I mean, I got to know him so well, him and his team, and that sort of gave me an outline for a police procedural format. Although he wrote back in the 50s, and things have changed, and you know, there's a lot of new electronics that are used, and cross references with the FBI. But I had the basics. And then I reached out to a retired homicide commander who would read what I wrote and comment on it and say, well, you need to do this and you need to do that. And you need to involve the FBI with VICAP, the violent, I forget the violent crime, VICAP. Boy, I'm stuck. I shouldn't even use the word.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's the source that the FBI keeps track of violent criminals. So he led me in the right direction. And so I had my writing coach helping me with the Crazed Killer. And I had a retired homicide commander who helping me with the police procedural. And the rest was the influence of so many years of reading Michael Connelly and Jeffrey Deaver and all others, right? And Thomas Harris and Vincent Bugliosi, who put together with another writer, he put together Helter Skelter. I think if I thought back to what was the one book that I ever read in my life that sort of pulled me into writing, it was Helter Skelter. Although it was true crime, the attention to detail that these two writers made when they wrote this book. The adage is, you pick a book up and you can't put it down. I couldn't. This thing I read probably back in the late 70s. And I was hooked. I read this thing and it fascinated me. So over the years, I was influenced by writing like that, and then the style of Jeffrey Deaver, Dean Koontz, Thomas Harris, Michael Connelly. I guess it's safe to say I developed a voice of my own based on their voices and whatnot. So that's how it worked. And you mentioned research before. Mm-hmm. It's so important. I spent a lot of time doing research. And if you get it wrong, your readers will call you out on it. Case in point, in the first book, Bone Thief, I armed my homicide Lieutenant John Driscoll with a gun. And I think the line in the manuscript said, Driscoll released the safety on his Glock revolver. And I had 8 people write to me saying, 1, Glock doesn't make a revolver, they only make pistols. And 2, there's no safety on a pistol. So okay, so that went through. My copy editor didn't catch it. My editor didn't catch it, and I was subject to someone telling me what to do. A few people sent me links to various gun manufacturers, Smith and Wesson and the like. But it was banter for a very fun conversation I had one evening. I was attending Thriller Fest years ago at the Hyatt in Manhattan. ITWs get together every year in July. And I was sitting, it's about 11 o'clock at night, and Lisa Gardner, a well-known, multi-talented writer who's got a number of New York Times best-selling books out there. We're sitting, enjoying a cocktail. And I was telling her the story of my mistake there. And she said, you only had 8 people write? I had 32. She did the same thing. So we left. I said, well, what did you do for the second book? She said, I armed him with a semi-automatic and left it at that. and that's what I did. So it's important to get the research right because they'll call you on it.
Absolutely.
And they get very specific, those that have knowledge of certain things. For example, in Bone Thief, again, the first book, I had a scene on a sailboat. And it was I believe a 38-foot sailboat. It was a sizable sailboat. And the lieutenant was wrestling with the perpetrator toward the end of the book. And before he got there, though, he arrived by helicopter, and he leapt from the helicopter and landed on the the deck and rolled. And this fellow took issue with it. He said, you have a 38-foot sailboat, which means the keel on that boat is so many feet in the water, which means the mast on that boat is so many feet high. And for an helicopter to be safe above that mast, he has to be X amount up. And there's no way he would have jumped without breaking his leg. So he did the math on it. So you got to get it right. That was very important.
Yeah, that is so true. And
Yeah.
It's so important to talk to actual people too. That's another
Yeah.
thing you just were saying. You spoke to a person.
Yes.
A lot of times I think some writers don't take that extra step and actually pick up the phone or just talk to a person,
Yeah.
which is so important sometimes.
I reached out to a medical team in the second book, The Screaming Room. I had a set of twins. They were a boy-girl set of twins, and I wanted to make them unique. And I discovered that there is 1 in 300 million chance of male-female twins having something at birth called the Turner syndrome. And it has to do with their chromosomes. And if they do have the Turner syndrome, and it's extremely rare, their DNA, even though they're male, female, their DNA would be identical. Perfect, because I set a scene where they discover DNA and it matches, and they assume that it's one individual when in fact it isn't. And I had to get that right. I mean, I did research online and got the details, but I remember calling someone that specialized in that. And we had a conversation on the phone about it, and she gave me mountains of information about it. So I got it right.
Wow, that's very interesting. A very interesting issue too.
Yeah, thanks.
Are you working on the 4th book now?
I am, and I'm not certain whether or not I want to bring Lieutenant Driscoll in this one. When you write a series, I find, I mean, Steve Carella lasted for 56 books, and in each one of them there was a difference. You could tell that there was a difference, and every time I introduced Driscoll when I did in the second book, in the third book, I had to go back to the first book to see how I introduced him, and then bring him in again with a similar introduction, but not identical. I'm not sure I want to, at this point, go with number 4. So the theme that's the basis of my 4th book has to do with a serial killer who wishes to confess to a writer and have a writer write his life story while he's still killing, with a threat, of course, that, if he doesn't, some very bad things would happen to him, his wife. And yeah, so I've got a pretty much a first draft of that written. And he can go to the police. He ends up going to a priest, and because he's hearing this confession, if you will, and it has to do with actual murder. And the priest links him with the FBI. I sort of went away from the NYPD because we got serial killing, and it's on a mass scale. It's various states. So I brought in the FBI, and we'll see how we do with that one. I've got a friend who is active in the FBI, so I've got a link there.
Boy, you have some contacts. Remind me to call you if I ever write something about serial killers or any of this. Wow, this is incredible. Yeah, so I was going to say, what is it that you think draws people to reading about this kind of thing? Because there's a lot of interest in true crime and serial killers.
Yeah, it's controlled fright. you hear about a serial killer. You read about I think it's the Lido Beach, um, the not the Lido Beach. There's a beach on Long Island where they keep finding bodies and they still haven't discovered who the killer is. They have no idea. In southern Long Island, southern Nassau County, and they think they know who it might be. He seems to have a penchant for women of the evening and women that he meets at clubs. But he or she, I'm assuming it's a he or she, hasn't been revealed yet. And that's a fascination. You take a look at Thomas Harris's wonderfully written book, The Silence of the Lambs, which was made into an incredible movie with Denzel Washington. And it's just fascinating. And it captures the attention of people in a safe way. They get to sit either on their couch and watch it on television, or they get to sit, under the covers and read it in a book. And that's close enough to being with a serial killer, but it's a fascination, I think, that people have. Murder has been the subject of writing. I mean, look at all of the murder that was in Shakespeare's works. It's something that happens that you hope never affects you personally, but it fascinates people, and that's the draw, I think. Yeah, so that's why I enjoy writing it, because I know there's an audience for it, and there's something about the pursuit and bringing that individual to justice that I like to do. And I chose writing a thriller as opposed to writing a mystery. The genres are similar but different. Mystery, you've got a crime, whether it be a murder or a robbery or a kidnapping, and you know who the victim is, and you know where it happened and when it happened, but you have no idea who did it. And along the way, there's a lot of red herrings, and the reader is kept interested because they're following these red herrings, and they're getting an idea as to who it might be. And at the end of the book, they may be surprised, or they may say, I knew it was so and so. That's one way of writing. But with a thriller, it's reverse. You open with the murder, you know who it is, and the question is, will this person be caught? Will this person be brought to justice, and how? So that's why I like a thriller as opposed to writing a thriller as opposed to writing a police procedural or a mystery, is because I like to grab the reader's attention in the first chapter. And it's my way of sort of inviting that reader onto a roller coaster of sorts. And then the idea is to never let them off the roller coaster. Just keep that book going until the very end, where they're catapulted. Wow, that's why I like writing a thriller.
The thriller is more like a roller coaster, whereas the mystery is more like a fun house, where you can't quite make out what the real truth is.
Yes. But I like to grab the reader, keep that reader's attention, and never let that attention go.
That's cool. Let's see. Your protagonist, the lieutenant there, John Driscoll, has some baggage of his own.
He does. He's an Irish cop. I'm an Irishman, and I remember when I decided to create him, and with all of the characters that I create, I sort of think about an actor or movie star, if you will, that I know, that people know, who would recognize, that would emulate my character. And at the time, Brian Dennehy was a big name, and he was a homicide commander in many TV shows and movies, and he was Driscoll. In my mind, he was Driscoll. the attributes I gave him sort of were attributes that I thought would fit Brian Dennehy. In fact, I met Brian Dennehy after a Broadway show he did. He did a show many years ago set in Ireland. And he's at the stage door. I got to meet him and I told him that I was working on a manuscript and I'd like him to be the star. And he said, well, have your people speak to my people. It never happened, but that's how I decide the character. And in Driscoll's circumstance, I wanted to give him a sadness in his life. I wanted to have the reader feel sorry for this guy, and so I opened with the scene. First time I introduced him, he's at the cemetery, and he's bidding farewell to his 14-year-old daughter, who he lost in an automobile accident. A drunk driver driving a tractor trailer hit the van that his wife and daughter were in, and catapulted his wife into a coma which she never recovers from, and it takes away his daughter. So he's conflicted. He's got a wife who's in a coma, who's at home, that he has a nurse taking care of by day, but he comes and has dinner with in the evening. And it gives him, he's full around, you really feel sorry for him and you get to like him a lot. And now he's got this challenge to go out and, chase down the bad guys. So that's the basis for John Driscoll. And the name itself, I remember when I was a kid, I was 15, 16, I was working in a butcher shop in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And we had a number of customers who would come in, and this one fella came in. His name was Driscoll. I don't remember his first name, but he was a retired detective, and he just looked the part. He had that raincoat. He was big and strong. He was the guy. So the name Driscoll stuck with me for many years. And then when I saw Brian Dennehy as Driscoll, it just all gelled.
Wow, that is really cool.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting.
Thank you.
Where can people find your work online, and where are you online?
My website is thomasocallahan.com. My books are on Amazon. The first two books, Bone Thief and The Screaming Room, were published by Kensington Books in New York in 2006 and 2007. And I took sort of a break from my writing and came out with the third book, No One Will Hear Your Screams, which was released last year by Wild Blue Press. And they then put out the second edition of Bone Thief and The Screaming Room. So if you Googled any of those titles, or if you went online for thomasocallahan.com, you'd have my website, you'd find the books. And the third book is actually now out as an Audible, and I listened to it. I wanted to proof it. I listened to it, and the guy does a good job. I would have liked to have done it, but I don't know if I've got the voice for it. But he certainly does, and he did a good job. So if someone was looking to purchase my books, 1, 2, 3, or the package, that's where they go. And of course they're on Amazon and Kindle.
Well, you used to do acting, so you could always try voice acting.
This is true. Yeah.
Just about.
I don't think I've ever stopped acting. I mean, to some degree, life calls for me to perform in some sense. So it's never left me, my acting.
I can appreciate that.
Thank you.
I used to think about going into acting also.
I decided not to when I realized that no money in it at all, unless you one in 100,000 shot at latching onto something. There was really no money, so I left to college and went into industry, the insurance industry.
Interesting. I ended up going to law school, which you didn't do.
No, I didn't.
But it helped me in various ways, so that's cool.
Very good.
Probably your background in insurance did too, for that matter.
You know why my background in insurance did? Because it took me 12 years to get my first and second book published. There's a lot of rejection and a lot of time spent on submitting manuscripts to literary agents who then submit it to publishers. And you're dealing with a lot of people saying, no, thank you. It's not right for me. It won't fit my list. And when I was in sales, I realized and I learned that every time I heard someone say, no, thank you, I was closer to a yes, please. So my sales career gave me the initiative and the gumption to just keep going. Anytime I got a manuscript back and it was, I read it, it needs some work, or no, thank you, or I think you need a professional editor to look at this. And when I started looking for a publisher, I knew I needed to go through a literary agent, because in fiction, the publishing companies, the small press maybe, but the major companies, they wanted to go through a literary agent, so they filter it that way. And this was back in like '98, I guess. The way to do it certainly wasn't online like you can now. It was by mail. And I went down to Barnes and Nobles and I bought this thick book, a list of literary agents in the United States. And I went through the book and found out which ones liked to read thrillers. And I mailed a query letter with sample chapters to what amounted to about 200 agents after the 2 or 3 year process. And a few of them said, I like it, but I think it needs work. You may want to consider a professional. And of course, I was swallowing my pride and saying, well, I'm just going to ask somebody else. But after I ran out of agents and I said, oh, I can't start over again, I took the advice of those individuals that said I needed a book doctor, a professional to read my work and to help me with it. And I went online and I searched for individual editors that would review and work with me on a thriller. And I saw a series of names. I didn't know them, but one name popped out because he had a pretty good background. His name is Debbi Mack, and the reason he popped out as like, wow, yeah, this is the guy to talk to, is he was the editor who helped Thomas Harris put together The Silence of the Lambs. Debbi Mack edited 9 of Robert Ludlum's books. So I said, this is the guy. But I said, he's never going to read my work. And I called him. He lived in Connecticut. We lost him about 1.5 years ago, sadly. He became a good friend of mine. But I called him because his phone the number was there. It was an email. And he answered. And I explained who I was and what I had and could he help me? And interestingly, I figured he was going to ask me all about the book. No, he didn't. He said, who did you submit it to and what did they say? So he was going to screen my work, and I was savvy enough to know some of the bigger names of big agents. So I used those names and I said, this is what so-and-so said, he reps John Deaver or Jeff Deaver. So I picked out the bigger names, who I had written to, who gave me some pointers. And I said, this is what was told to me by these individuals. And he said, well, I think we could work on it and work together. And I submitted a 400-page typed manuscript. And about 3 or 4 months later, he sent it back to me with a slew of agents, a slew of edits, a lot of big X's on several pages. And I mean, he watched every comma and every pronunciation and just syntax. He was just masterful. And he said, it's probably going to take you about a year to do these edits. And I thought, a year, I'll knock it off in 3 months. It took me 14 months to do exactly what he called for. And once I did, I sent it back to him. He read it. He said, I think we're ready. And he gave me the name of an agent, Matt Biala, in Manhattan here, a literary agent. I sent it to Matt with Dick Marrick's incentive. And he sent it out to 12 publishers, and 11 said no, but one said yes, Kensington Books.
Well, it takes one.
All it takes is one, yeah. So they published those 2 books, and that's how it worked.
Wow, that is absolutely fantastic. I know what it's like to get those rejections, although I never got the comments. It's great that they were commenting.
Yeah.
Usually it was just a scribbled, no thank you, or not for us.
Right. Or no response.
I was at the point where, they were so busy that they couldn't really give you a personal response.
Yeah.
They were so overwhelmed with manuscripts, I think.
Yeah.
So I never held that against them, actually, although it felt kind of bad, but still, even so.
I can remember getting a manuscript back, and once you get the box back, you knew it was a no, and it came back on a Friday, and my wife hid it because she didn't want my weekend to be ruined. She hid the box and gave it to me on Monday. I remember that. So, but
oh my gosh,
I persevered.
Persevere.
Mm.
I'm going to have to wrap up here, but is there anything you'd like to add before we finish?
No, just that I appreciate the time spent with you. I like your vitality. I like your personality. And this was a very nice exchange. I enjoyed it very much.
Cool. Well, I enjoyed it too. It was fascinating to talk to you, and I really do appreciate your being here and talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Sure thing. I just want to add to just in closing that we are Patreon supported. I will include a link to Patreon below this video and on the blog post where the podcast is being run. And I will also include a link to my fundraising team. I'm raising funds for research on dystonia, and you can read more about that on my blog.
Okay.
And I'll just say thank you to everyone who's listening. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another author. And in the meantime, take care and happy reading.